"You're my wife now," Olivia whispered, voice trembling as she adjusted the crisp white sheets over the still figure of Ethan Carter, the billionaire CEO who had been in a coma for over 18 months. The room was bathed in a soft golden light from the bedside lamp, the monitors around him beeping a steady rhythm that seemed almost too calm for the weight of the moment. Olivia's heart raced as she smoothed the folds of his blanket, the lace of her dress brushing against her fingers, and she tried to steady her breathing. She glanced at the window, where the city lights of New York twinkled through the rain, the soft patter on the glass echoing the nervous pounding in her chest. Outside the hospital, the streets were quiet, cars moving slowly, headlights reflecting in puddles, but inside, time felt frozen, every second stretched taut with anticipation. Olivia took a careful step closer, her shoes whispering against the polished floor, and reached out to gently press the back of her hand to Ethan's wrist, feeling the warmth of his skin under the cold hospital gown. A sigh escaped her lips as she whispered again, "I'll stay with you. Every night, I'll be here." The room smelled faintly of antiseptic mixed with the subtle perfume she had applied, and the contrast made the moment feel even more surreal. She bent over slightly, adjusting the pillow under his head, her fingers trembling as she traced the line of his jaw, imagining how the first stir of consciousness would feel, the moment his eyes would flicker open. Memories of the past months flashed through her mind, countless nights sitting by his bedside, reading aloud stories about faraway places, speaking softly so that he might hear the cadence of her voice, never expecting anything in return, driven only by a stubborn, quiet hope that someone so important, so untouchable in the world outside, might recognize the care and warmth she offered. Each monitor beep seemed to echo her thoughts, a reminder of the fragility of the line between life and oblivion. She smoothed the blanket once more, her fingers lingering over his hand, imagining the day he would wake and not remember the world, not even the people who loved him, except perhaps the one who had spoken to him night after night with unwavering devotion. The hospital door creaked softly in the hallway as a nurse passed by, glancing in briefly, and Olivia swallowed the lump in her throat, focusing back on him, the man who was legally her husband yet a stranger in every sense. Her voice was barely audible as she murmured, "Good night, Ethan. Tomorrow, I'll be here again." Outside, the rain intensified, streaking the glass with silver trails, and she pressed a hand to the window for a fleeting moment of connection to the world beyond the sterile walls. The city lights reflected in her eyes, casting tiny specks of gold across her face, mirroring the golden light that illuminated the room. In the silence, only the monitor's beep and the quiet rhythm of her breathing filled the space, and Olivia stood there, poised between hope and fear, the weight of her vows pressing against her chest, knowing that the next moment could change everything yet hold nothing at all, and as she straightened her shoulders, the faintest flutter of movement beneath the blanket made her pause, breath caught, heart hammering in her ears, hinting that the miracle she had longed for might finally be closer than she ever dared imagine. Olivia froze as she stared at Ethan's hand beneath the blanket, wondering if she had imagined the movement. For a moment, the steady beeping of the monitor seemed louder than the rain outside. She stepped closer, her pulse quickening, and gently rested her fingers against his wrist. Nothing happened. His face remained peaceful and still, as if he were trapped in a dream that stretched endlessly beyond her reach. A small laugh escaped her lips, shaky and uncertain. "You are making me believe in miracles again," she whispered. The words lingered in the warm glow of the room before fading into silence. After a few more seconds, she forced herself to step back. It was late. Visiting hours had ended hours ago, and most of the hospital had settled into its familiar nighttime quiet. Yet Olivia could not bring herself to leave immediately. She pulled a small silver recorder from her bag and placed it on the bedside table. It had become part of her routine months earlier. Every evening she recorded a short message so Ethan could hear a familiar voice even when she was not there. The doctors never promised it helped, but she continued anyway. Hope did not always need proof. She pressed the button and smiled softly. "Good night, Ethan. It is Olivia. Today the rain never stopped. New York looks like someone painted the whole city grey. I know that sounds depressing, but somehow it is beautiful too. Maybe when you wake up, I will show you." She paused, glancing at his face. "And yes, I said when, not if." The recorder clicked off. Olivia slipped it back into her bag and finally headed toward the door. Before leaving, she looked back one last time. Tomorrow, she promised. The next morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the hospital windows. Olivia barely had time to set down her coffee before her phone buzzed. The caller ID showed the name she had been expecting and dreading. Arthur Carter. Ethan's grandfather. She answered immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." His voice sounded tired. "Olivia, can you meet me in my office this afternoon?" A knot formed in her stomach. "Of course." The call ended, leaving her uneasy. Arthur Carter was not a man who requested meetings without reason. By noon, Olivia found herself crossing the executive wing of the hospital. Plush carpets replaced tile floors. Expensive paintings lined the walls. Everything felt worlds away from the intensive care unit where she spent most of her days. Arthur stood by the window when she entered. At 78, he carried himself with quiet dignity, though the past 2 years had clearly weighed heavily on him. He turned and offered a faint smile. "Thank you for coming." Olivia sat across from him. "You sounded concerned." Arthur lowered himself into his chair and folded his hands. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he opened a folder resting on the desk. "The board wants control." Olivia frowned. "Control of what?" "Everything." His eyes darkened. "The company, the voting shares, Ethan's future. They believe he will never wake up." Olivia looked down at the documents spread before him, suddenly aware that the room felt much colder than before. Arthur's voice softened. "There is only one way to stop them." Olivia returned to the intensive care unit later that afternoon, her steps measured and deliberate as she navigated the quiet hallways, her eyes briefly catching the soft reflections of sunlight on the polished floors. The memory of her meeting with Arthur Carter lingered in her mind, heavy and urgent, and she could not shake the weight of his words. Ethan's shares, his future, and the control of the company rested precariously in her hands, yet she was not a businesswoman, she was a nurse who had spent countless hours beside a man who had not yet woken. She pushed the thought aside as she entered Ethan's room, the familiar hum of monitors greeting her like an old friend. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, the steady beep of the heart monitor marking the passage of time. Olivia approached his bedside, careful not to disturb the 4 lines or the neatly folded blankets. Her fingers hovered over his hand for a brief moment before she laid them gently on the back of his wrist, feeling the warmth beneath the thin hospital gown. A quiet determination settled over her as she adjusted the pillow under his head and checked the small silver recorder she had placed there earlier. This routine had become the thread that connected her to him, and she relied on it as much as he might someday. "Good afternoon, Ethan," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "I have something to show you tomorrow, something small, but I think you will like it." She paused to smooth the folds of the blanket and straighten the sheets, her hands moving with practiced precision. For months she had followed this ritual, speaking to him as if he could hear every word, believing in a hope that had no guarantee of fulfillment. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and the subtle trace of her lavender hand cream, a scent she knew she would never forget. As she stepped back and observed him, she imagined how he might react when he finally opened his eyes. Would he recognize the familiar cadence of her voice? Would he feel comforted by the sound of someone who had been constant, unwavering, through months of silence? The thought gave her strength, a quiet courage that she clutched like a talisman. She glanced at the window and saw the first light of evening filtering through the glass, the city beyond already glowing with the soft illumination of street lamps. Taking a deep breath, she moved to the small desk at the corner of the room, arranging some notes and a warm cup of tea for herself, preparing for the long evening ahead. Each sound, each subtle movement in the room became amplified in her mind, the gentle hum of the havac, the soft clicks of her shoes against the floor, even the distant echo of a nurse walking down the hall. She settled into the chair, pulling her cardigan tightly around her shoulders, and allowed herself a brief moment to reflect on the stakes she had inherited. Arthur's warning weighed heavily, and the thought of the board acting without her intervention brought a tension that pressed against her ribs. Yet she reminded herself that she had the power to maintain the bridge between life and the world waiting for Ethan. This quiet resolve set the rhythm for her evening. She would care for him, preserve his health, and maintain the connection that might one day awaken the man who had been waiting silently for months, and she would do it with the same dedication and heart that had brought her to this moment, knowing that the smallest acts of patience and presence could shape the course of his recovery and the fate of everything surrounding him. The following evening arrived wrapped in a steady spring rain that painted silver streaks across the hospital windows. Olivia sat beside Ethan's bed with a hardcover novel resting in her lap, the familiar yellow glow of the bedside lamp casting soft shadows across the room. The intensive care unit had grown quiet again, most visitors long gone, leaving only the distant hum of equipment and the gentle beeping of monitors. It had become their time, the hour she secretly looked forward to every day. She opened the book and began reading, her voice calm and warm, flowing through the room like a comforting melody. As always, Ethan remained motionless, his expression unchanged, his eyes closed to the world around him. Yet Olivia never allowed that silence to discourage her. She believed that somewhere beyond the darkness, some hidden part of him could still hear her. After several pages, she closed the book and smiled softly. "You know, Ethan, I have never actually told you much about myself." She adjusted the blanket near his shoulder. "When I was 12 years old, my mother spent 6 months in a hospital room. I used to sit beside her after school and tell her stories because I was afraid she felt lonely." Her eyes drifted toward the rain outside. "I guess some habits never leave us." She laughed quietly. "You are probably tired of hearing my voice by now." At that exact moment, a sharp tone interrupted the steady rhythm of the room. Olivia looked up immediately. One of the monitors displayed a brief spike. Her smile disappeared. She leaned closer, checking the screen carefully. The numbers settled back to normal within seconds. "That is strange," she whispered. She pressed the call button and waited. A few minutes later, Dr. Marcus Hale entered the room carrying a tablet. He reviewed the readings while Olivia explained what she had seen. "The activity increased when I was speaking," she said. Dr. Hale studied the data. "It is possible," he replied cautiously. "Patients sometimes respond to familiar stimulation." Olivia frowned. "But I am not familiar to him." The doctor glanced toward Ethan before looking back at her. "Maybe you are more familiar than you realize." The answer stayed with her long after he left. Later that night, after finishing her shift, Olivia remained in the room alone. She pulled the small silver recorder from her bag and placed it carefully beside the bed. For a moment she hesitated, then pressed the button. "Good night, Ethan." Today Dr. Hale noticed something interesting. "Every time I talked, your brain activity changed." She smiled despite herself. "Maybe that means you are listening after all." Her gaze settled on his face. "If you can hear me, I want you to know something. No matter what happens with the company or the board or any of the things people are fighting about outside this room, I am not going anywhere." The recorder continued capturing every word. "Tomorrow I will bring your favorite music." "Well, I think it is your favorite. Your grandfather told me you used to listen to Moonlight Waltz during long flights." She reached forward and gently squeezed his hand. "So tomorrow we will test that theory." As she stood to leave, her fingers slipped from his. Then she froze. For the briefest second, she felt a faint pressure against her palm. Not enough to prove anything. Not enough for certainty. But enough to make her heart stop. Olivia slowly turned back toward the bed, her breath caught in her throat, staring at Ethan's still hand and wondering if, somewhere deep inside the silence, he had just tried to hold hers. The following morning, Olivia arrived earlier than usual, her footsteps echoing softly along the quiet hallway as she approached Ethan's room. The rain had stopped, leaving streets slick and reflective outside the windows, and the soft light of sunrise filtered through the blinds. She carried a small portable speaker in her hands, her fingers gripping it tightly as if it were a lifeline. Inside the room, the monitors beeped in steady rhythm, a familiar soundtrack to her long nights at his bedside. Olivia placed the speaker carefully on the bedside table and pressed play, the gentle strains of Moonlight Waltz filling the space, curling around the quiet corners of the room. She smiled softly and sat down, adjusting the blanket over Ethan's shoulder once more. "I hope you like it," she whispered, her voice low but steady, carrying just enough warmth to reach him, even if he could not respond. She observed his chest, the slow rise and fall, and for a fleeting moment, her mind raced with hope that the music might spark something unseen, a flicker of recognition, a sign that the connection they had nurtured through countless nights of spoken stories and whispered words could take hold. She adjusted the angle of the lamp so the golden glow touched his face, highlighting the sharp lines softened by months of sleep, and she imagined him waking, blinking at the light, finding her there as he had always heard her voice. The minutes passed in silence, the music continuing to play, and Olivia leaned back slightly, letting the sound wash over her as well. She thought about the last conversation with Arthur Carter, about the precarious control of the company and the pressure that hung over Ethan's future. She had no solutions for the board or the executives, but she could continue to do what she knew best, care for him with patience and constancy. She opened her notebook quietly and began writing, jotting notes for the day, reminders, observations, and thoughts that might be helpful later, a silent record of her dedication. Occasionally, she would glance up at him, imagining a world where he opened his eyes and found the warmth of her presence, not the sterile lights or the ticking of machines, but the human care she had offered tirelessly. Time seemed to slow as she read passages from the novel again, her voice steady, rhythmic, a soft wave over the still room. She could almost feel the room respond, the faint tremor in the air, the subtle warmth that seemed to radiate from her touch. When the music ended, she switched it off and stood, stretching briefly, her eyes never leaving him. She placed her hand lightly on his arm, whispering, "Tomorrow, we continue. I will not give up." With a deep breath, she gathered her supplies, straightened the blanket one last time, and moved to the door. She paused, glancing back at Ethan, the faintest hint of movement in his fingers catching her attention. She held her breath, a smile tugging at her lips, knowing that even the smallest gesture might be the beginning of something extraordinary, a connection that could not be measured by charts or reports, only by the patient, unwavering presence she had given him every day. 3 nights later, the hospital was wrapped in an unusual stillness. The city beyond the windows glittered beneath a clear sky, and the moonlight spilled across the floor in pale silver ribbons. Olivia sat beside Ethan as she always did, her novel resting unopened in her lap. Somehow she could not focus on the words tonight. There was a strange feeling in the air, a quiet tension she could not explain. She glanced toward the monitor and noticed the steady rhythm was slightly faster than usual. Not alarming. Just different. She leaned forward and gently adjusted the blanket near his shoulder. "You have been keeping everyone guessing lately," she said with a faint smile. "Dr. Hale thinks your responses are becoming stronger. Your grandfather is convinced you are going to wake up soon. As for me, I stopped trying to predict anything a long time ago." Her fingers brushed lightly against his hand before she reached for the silver recorder. Pressing the button, she began her nightly message. "Good night, Ethan." Today the sun finally came out. People were smiling again. The coffee downstairs was terrible, but somehow I survived. I know that sounds exciting. She laughed softly. Tomorrow is Saturday. I am off duty, but I will still come see you. I always do. She placed the recorder beside him and stood. For a moment she simply looked at his face. The room was quiet except for the familiar beeping that had become part of her life. Then something changed. A sudden sharp tone broke through the silence. Olivia froze. Her eye snapped toward the monitor. Numbers flashed across the screen. The heart rate had jumped. Her pulse quickened. "Ethan," she whispered. Another tone sounded. Before she could reach the call button, his fingers moved. Not a twitch. Not a reflex. A real movement. Olivia stumbled forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Ethan." His hand shifted again. The monitor continued its rapid rhythm. Her breath caught as his eyelids fluttered. Once. Twice. Then slowly, impossibly, his eyes opened. For a second he stared upward at the ceiling, blinking against the light. Confusion filled his expression. The world seemed to stop turning. Olivia could not move. She could barely breathe. "Dr. Hale," she shouted, reaching for the emergency button. Footsteps immediately echoed through the hallway. Nurses and doctors rushed toward the room. But Ethan never looked at them. His gaze drifted across the room until it found Olivia. Everything else seemed to disappear. The noise. The movement. The chaos. His eyes remained fixed on her face. Olivia felt tears gathering before she even realized she was crying. "Ethan," she whispered again. His brow tightened slightly. He looked confused, lost, as though searching through 1,000 locked doors. Dr. Hale entered with the medical team, issuing calm instructions while checking vital signs. Yet Ethan continued staring only at Olivia. Then his lips parted. The sound that emerged was barely more than a breath. Weak. Fragile. But unmistakable. "Tomorrow," Olivia stared at him. The room fell silent around her. Ethan swallowed and repeated the word. "Tomorrow." Her heart nearly stopped. Those were the last words from her recording. The words she had spoken every single night. And in that moment, before anyone could celebrate, before anyone could understand what had happened, Olivia realized something extraordinary. He had opened his eyes to a world he no longer recognized. But somehow, somewhere in the darkness he had been trapped in for 18 months, her voice had found him. The ICU room was filled with attention that hung like a living thing, monitors beeping softly around them as Olivia sank into the chair beside Ethan's bed. The rush of doctors and nurses had subsided, leaving a quiet that was almost sacred. She reached out and rested her hand lightly on his, marveling at the warmth that seemed to confirm he was truly awake. Ethan's eyes, wide and searching, scanned the room as if he had stepped into a world he no longer recognized. His gaze lingered on Olivia, the first face he seemed to focus on, and he blinked, trying to comprehend the familiarity that tugged at the edges of his memory. He tried to speak, but his voice was hoarse, the words barely audible over the gentle hum of the machines. Olivia leaned closer, encouraging, her voice low and steady. "It is okay, Ethan. Take your time. You are safe." He swallowed, focusing on her, and a flicker of recognition passed across his features. She gently squeezed his hand again. "Do you remember anything?" she asked softly. His eyes shifted, confused, scanning the room briefly before returning to her. "Your voice," he rasped, his words hesitant, fragile. "I remember your voice." Olivia's heart skipped. The recorder, the nightly readings, the hours she had spent speaking to him, had not been wasted. She smiled through tears. "That is all I ever hoped you would remember," she whispered. He attempted to lift his hand, and she guided it to hold hers more securely, as if he could anchor himself in that single thread of memory. Outside the room, the morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the floor, yet inside, time seemed suspended, every breath and heartbeat magnified. He blinked again, taking in her features slowly, each detail becoming a landmark in a world that had been blank for so long. Olivia continued to speak, recounting simple, familiar things, the color of the blanket, the sound of the rain on the windows last night, the little things that had filled their days together. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a sense of calm spread across Ethan's face. He was awake, truly awake, and yet fragile in his understanding of the world. He looked down at their joined hands, turning them over as if testing the reality of their connection. Olivia tightened her grip gently, letting him feel that nothing had changed in their bond, even if everything else had. "I have been here every night," she said softly. "I will not leave. We will take this day by day." The weight of the moment pressed against her chest, the immense relief, the quiet triumph of patience and care, settling into a warmth she could barely contain. Ethan's lips moved again, forming the words slowly. "Only you," Olivia nodded, eyes glistening. Outside the door, the hallway was coming alive with the sounds of morning rounds, distant conversations, the echo of wheels on polished floors, but within the room, all that mattered was the fragile, dawning connection between a man returning to the world and the woman whose unwavering voice had guided him back. Ethan's recovery progressed faster than anyone expected, but each new day revealed a strange truth that left the doctors puzzled. His body was healing, his strength slowly returning, yet vast pieces of his memory remained locked away. He could remember how to read, how to hold a conversation, even how to use a tablet, but when Arthur Carter entered the room and introduced himself as his grandfather, Ethan's eyes filled with confusion. When members of the executive board visited, hoping for recognition, he stared at them politely as if meeting strangers for the first time. Names, faces, business deals, entire years of his life seemed to exist behind a thick wall he could not cross. Yet whenever Olivia walked into the room, something changed. The tension left his shoulders. His eyes immediately found her. The confusion softened. It was as though her presence anchored him to reality. One afternoon, sunlight streamed through the large hospital windows while Olivia helped him complete another therapy session. Ethan sat in a chair beside the bed, still weaker than normal but improving every day. He watched her organize a stack of notes on the table. "Have we met before?" he suddenly asked. Olivia paused. "Before the hospital." Ethan nodded slowly. "Sometimes it feels like I know you. Not from memory. From somewhere deeper." Olivia looked down at the papers in her hands. "You have heard my voice almost every day for 18 months. A faint smile appeared on Ethan's face. "Maybe that is why it feels impossible to forget." The answer should have been simple, yet neither of them fully believed it. Later that evening, after physical therapy ended, Ethan noticed the small silver recorder sitting beside the lamp. He pointed toward it. "What is that?" Olivia hesitated before picking it up. "A recorder." "Yours?" "Sort of." Curiosity appeared in his eyes. "Can I hear it?" Olivia's heart skipped. She pressed play. The room filled with her familiar voice. "Good night, Ethan. Today the rain never stopped. New York looks like someone painted the whole city gray." Ethan froze. His breathing slowed. His eyes widened. The recording continued. "I know that sounds depressing, but somehow it is beautiful too. Maybe when you wake up, I will show you." Ethan stared at the recorder as if it contained a secret map to a forgotten world. When the message ended, silence settled over the room. He swallowed hard. "That is the voice." Olivia looked at him carefully. "What voice?" "The one I kept hearing." His gaze drifted toward the window. "I remember darkness. Nothing else. Just darkness and your voice finding me every night." Emotion tightened Olivia's chest. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Ethan looked back at her and asked the question she had secretly feared. "Why would someone stay that long for a stranger?" Olivia searched for an answer, but none seemed large enough. Finally she smiled softly. "Because I never believed you were a stranger." Ethan held her gaze longer than before. Outside, the sun slowly disappeared behind the city skyline, painting the room gold and amber. And for the first time since waking up, Ethan felt something stronger than confusion. He felt safe. Over the next week, Ethan's physical recovery continued to impress the medical team, but something else began to emerge beneath the surface. The confusion that once filled his eyes was slowly being replaced by fragments, brief flashes of something buried deep inside his memory. One afternoon, Olivia found him standing near the hospital window during a supervised therapy session, staring at the traffic moving far below. The skyline stretched across the horizon beneath a bright blue sky, but Ethan seemed focused on something far beyond the view. "Are you tired?" Olivia asked gently as she approached. Ethan shook his head. No, his voice was stronger now. "I just saw something." Olivia's heart skipped. "A memory." He frowned. "Maybe." She guided him back toward the chair. "What did you see?" Ethan sat down slowly and rubbed his forehead. "A road." He paused. "Wet pavement." Headlights. His eyes narrowed. And a bridge. Olivia remained quiet, allowing him space to continue. Then everything disappears. He exhaled heavily. It happens every time I close my eyes. That evening, after he had fallen asleep, Olivia sat in the hospital cafeteria reviewing his latest reports. Dr. Hale joined her carrying a cup of coffee. His recovery is remarkable, he said. Olivia smiled. I know. The doctor hesitated. But these returning memories could be difficult. Olivia looked up. You think they are connected to the accident? Dr. Hale nodded slowly. Possibly. Trauma does not always return in order. The conversation lingered in Olivia's thoughts long after she returned to Ethan's room. The next morning, Arthur Carter arrived carrying a thin leather folder. He looked more relieved than she had seen him in months. Ethan greeted him politely, but the familiar confusion returned when Arthur attempted to discuss family history. After a few minutes, Arthur quietly handed the folder to Olivia. These were among Ethan's personal effects. Olivia opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, notes, and a few business documents. Most seemed ordinary until one image caught her attention. It showed Ethan standing beside a black luxury sedan parked near a coastal bridge. Ethan stared at the photograph the moment she handed it to him. His expression changed instantly. The color drained from his face. That bridge, he whispered. Olivia leaned forward. You recognize it? Ethan's fingers tightened around the edge of the photograph. I keep seeing it. His breathing became uneven. Every night. Suddenly another image flashed through his mind. A ringing phone. Rain on glass. A voice. Not Olivia's voice. Someone else's. Familiar. Urgent. Then it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Ethan closed his eyes and pressed a hand against his temple. Olivia immediately knelt beside him. It is okay. Do not force it. Slowly, he opened his eyes again. There was someone with me. Olivia froze. Someone in the car. Ethan nodded. I cannot see their face. His gaze drifted back toward the photograph. But I know they mattered. Silence settled between them. Outside the hospital window, clouds began gathering over the city. Inside the room, a different storm was beginning to form. For the first time since waking up, Ethan was not simply recovering. He was remembering. And neither of them realized that the answers hidden inside those memories would soon change everything they thought they knew about the accident that had stolen nearly 2 years of his life.